Screen share.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are at session 3 of day 1. Adrienne, I am so excited to get into your content and session today. We're letting a few people jump in. It's right at 1:15, so we are right on time. Welcome back, everyone. If you've been enjoying our other sessions from the day, I'd love to hear how the experience has been for you. Any nuggets or takeaways, drop those in the chat while we're getting ready for today. If this is your first session, welcome to Clicks and Communities. We are going to be diving into our final foundational session for today. So for this session, Adrienne Mansfield from ADage Marketing Group is joining us to share her insights and research about the shifting and evolving audience persona in senior living. So welcome, Adrienne.
Thank you so much, Katie. I'm thrilled to be here, and grateful to be a part of such an informative and brilliantly curated summit. We are going to talk about senior living entering its most significant identity shift in history. So welcome to all of you who've joined. And as everyone continues to join, please feel free to jump in the chat, let everyone know that you're here. That'll be managed, and there will be time at the end for questions. So to get us started, as I said, senior living is entering the most significant identity shift in its history. We've all heard about the demographic growth. That's only part of the story. Demographic growth is predictable. We knew that this wave of demand was coming. And when it's predictable, we can model it, we can plan for it, we can build around it. But what's changing faster than the demographic growth are the expectations that our future consumers have around aging. Today, people considering senior living in the next 5 to 10 years are bringing a different set of assumptions about their autonomy, their identity, what family means, their requirements for privacy, their preferences around technology, and what wellness, contribution, and belonging mean to them. And those things change every question that they're asking. The question is no longer, will I be safe here? It's also, will I still feel like myself here? That's a really different design challenge for us. So today is not a prediction exercise about some distant future that we're envisioning. It's a really practical conversation about how understanding changing behavior and lived expectations is already reshaping what it means to be successful in senior living. The future of senior living is no longer going to be measured by occupancy alone. That's the thing that I want you to take away today. We're going to introduce a new metric, and that's alignment. And let me show you why 2030 is already here. See, disruption rarely arrives all at once. Most transformations arrive quietly with small behavioral signals that are easy to dismiss one by one. Maybe a prospect asks if their granddaughter can stay overnight. Maybe a future resident asks whether he can continue consulting part-time. How strong is your Wi-Fi? A family asks whether or not your EMAR protects privacy. In the moment, those sound like separate operational questions, but they're often asking something much larger. The overnight guest question may really be about family continuity. The work question is actually rooted in identity and contribution. And the technology concern comes from fears around losing privacy and really losing control. So together, what these things signal is a broader rewiring of the expectations around aging. Residents are increasingly expecting environments that adapt to them, not environments that they have to shrink themselves into. That affects how we're going to approach design, staffing, programming, technology, our communication platforms, our pricing transparency, governance, and ultimately the sales experience. So when expectations change faster than our systems evolve, trust gaps start to appear. Not necessarily because our communities aren't beautiful, but because the experience no longer feels aligned with what the resident is trying to preserve. So again, if there's any questions, please enter them in the chat and we'll do them at the end. And let's take a look at what the future resident expects from us. One of the most useful questions we can ask in our leadership team meetings is, who was senior living originally designed around? For decades, communities were built around a relatively standardized set of expectations on aging: shared routines, shared schedules, shared activities, and people's willingness to adapt to their system. That resident does still exist. The problem is that treating that resident as the universal template no longer works. The future resident may be living alone, still working, closely connected with grandchildren, deeply face-centered, culturally specific, digitally fluent, privacy conscious, or several of those things at once. And we're going to walk through a few examples of what each of those looks like in a human being in just a little bit. But increasingly, what we need to remember is that residents want community without the loss of self. Traditional systems unintentionally communicated, join us. The emerging expectation is understand me. Beautiful surroundings, great dining, wellness programming, your transportation, that all still matters. But increasingly, that's just the baseline. That's the foundation, right? The stronger differentiator in the future is going to be emotional coherence. Do people feel respected, represented? Are they known? Can they exercise agency and continue to contribute to their community? We're no longer just designing buildings. In the future, we're designing social ecosystems. And these changing expectations, they're not happening in isolation. They're being accelerated by 5 larger forces. We refer to those as macro shifts. The first is demographic transformation. Yes, we know there are more people aging in the population, but it's more than just growing older. The population itself is becoming more diverse, built in and rooted in culture, identity, different household structures, incomes, lived experience, and health expectations. It's no longer one dominant aging narrative. Second is technology acceleration. We all know about artificial intelligence, but it's more than that. It's automation, it's smart home systems, telehealth, digital communication that's changing how people are already managing their daily life as they age. And residents in the future are going to judge our technology by whether it creates greater autonomy and ease, not just our own convenient operational efficiency. The third is social and cultural evolution. Expectations in the future around identity and family and inclusion and privacy and contribution are changing. Residents are increasingly expecting communities that understand the full context of their lives. And the fourth is the redefinition of home. Home is no longer just about a residence. It may be also a workspace, a creative space, a wellness environment, a place for their family to gather, a cultural anchor, or a platform to continue to contribute. And fifth is the economic and market realignment. So as we know, the middle market has been growing. And what that really means is that there's affordability pressure, workforce constraints, new service models, changing family resources, and a more informed consumer that are all reshaping what our communities are going to be able to offer based on what residents consider valuable. So these 5 forces, they overlap, they compound one another. Together, they're moving us away from standardized models and towards adaptive ecosystems. The residents shaping these forces aren't necessarily going to wait for 2030. They're already in your CRM. They're already touring. They're already making decisions for their parents for the same reasons that we're not yet measuring, right? We're going to get into what we're not measuring in just a moment. But before we meet the residents that are shaping this future and these changing expectations, I want to offer some clarification. These are not rigid categories. They're not special populations or predictions of a potential universal future resident set. They're composite profiles, and we built them from interviews, behavioral data, psychographic and demographic patterns that we're seeing and analyzing, family structure shifts, our own field observations, and emerging expectations that are being cataloged and trended. So these aren't niches. The future market is very layered. Many of these people will carry several identities, relationships, motivations, and preferences all at once. So don't listen for an exact match. Listen for signals. What expectation is this person making visible? What assumption is this persona challenging? What would this resident require to feel respected, useful, and safe in our environment? The goal is not exclusion, it's precision. So I just want you to know, if you see niches, you're kind of missing the point. All right, so join me. This is Marjorie. She is 76, widowed, independent, and deeply engaged in learning, volunteering, and mentoring. She is not resisting your community. She is resisting identity loss. She does not want an environment that replaces her very active life with passive participation. She wants privacy. She wants intellectual engagement, autonomy, and opportunities to feel useful. That distinction matters because for a growing number of solo agers who rely on community far more than just for the housing, they're looking for the social connection and the emotional continuity of someone around them who cares. So for Marjorie, the question isn't what activities do you offer? It's, is there a meaningful role for me here? She wants relevance, not just entertainment. So then we move into Sam and Maria Delgado. They are not evaluating senior living as isolated individuals. They're evaluating it as a part of their multi-generational family system. For them, grandchildren aren't occasional visitors. Faith is not a side activity. Language is not about simply communicating. Culture is not there for decoration. Those things mean home. I'm working with a family-owned assisted living organization right now that was inspired by the founder's own mother. She had a long-term illness, and as her family cared for her, she repeatedly expressed that she did not want to move into a traditional nursing environment. Her concern was not the building. She was worried about the language barrier. She was worried about unfamiliar food. She was worried about being surrounded by routines and customs that she didn't recognize. She was worried that receiving care requires her to leave too much of herself behind. Her family did learn about assisted living and saw an opportunity to create something different, an environment where elders from their community could be supported without culturally being displaced. And that distinction matters. These people were not resistant to safety or care. They were resistant to the possibility that receiving care means becoming a stranger inside your own life. This is what the profile for Sam and Maria Delgado help us understand. A community can be operationally excellent and still feel emotionally foreign if those rhythms are absent. And that changes how we think about visitation, dining, staffing, programming, even the spaces that we design. Sam and Maria are not asking for a culturally themed experience. They're asking for cultural intelligence to be built into your operating model, which is a little different than we've done things in the past. Now, Diane looks like your average resident, but she challenges the idea that engagement has to be visible, frequent, or highly social. She's very creative. She's introverted. She runs a small online Etsy business. She lives for her dog Baxter and is fiercely protective of her own autonomy. She does not want to be isolated. She wants to control her connection. So for Diane, well-being might look like quiet routines, creative work, small groups, private retreats, and controlling her social energy. Forced activities, over-the-top programming, or any restrictions around her dog are gonna be huge issues for her. That communicates this place does not respect how I choose to live. She's not looking for, again, engagement or programming. She's searching for connection without intrusion. And George and Marisol are not our typical affluent residents. They're very expectation rich. They're highly educated, civically engaged, digitally comfortable, very health conscious, and making proactive lifestyle choices rather than reacting to a crisis. So they expect a senior living community to perform at the level of any other consumer experience they already know. If you can't keep up with the Hilton, you can't keep up with the Bennetts. So they expect proactive wellness, technological competence, cultural fluency, leadership transparency, and meaningful resident influence. They notice when your stated values and your daily operations don't match. And they're not going to lower their standards just because they're aging. They're raising the bar for what an aging environment should deliver. Now, Tony is 68, queer, digitally fluent, still consulting, creatively active, and deeply intentional about her boundaries. Again, she's not rejecting community. She's rejecting any environment that requires her to self-erase in exchange for belonging. If you've not seen The Passions Project by Heidi Wagner, Heidi Graham, she does an incredible job of illustrating what it looks like to be LGBT in today's environments. And many, many times older adults feel the need to go back into the closet in order to receive care. So this is a different generation now that we're going to be dealing with in the next 5 to 10 years. Tony reads your signals really quickly. Is your inclusive language natural or performative? Do your policies match your messaging? Are autonomy, privacy, and chosen families genuinely respected? She expects an opt-in culture. She doesn't want to be managed into engagement or monitored through any of your technology. She's not simply asking, would I live here? It's, would I recognize myself here? What parts of myself do I have to give up to be a part of this community? And that's exactly what we want to move away from. So here we have another couple where first generation immigrants from China, they're looking at senior living as much more than a housing decision. It's a family decision, it's a cultural decision, it's a decision for their legacy, which is very, very important to them. And that is about respecting their dignity. It's not just, is this a nice place? It's how does our story continue here? For them, trust is going to be built through language, familiarity, family involvement, financial clarity, and demonstrated competence. One of the things that I found interesting earlier in Nate's presentation was talking about how individual the stories are that we can capture within our communities. And he was giving examples of go out and look up social accounts that are doing a good job of talking about aging. Arthur and Belinda Chang remind me very much of Boston Seniors. If you look them up on TikTok, I believe it's a Mandarin speaking community, and they do a phenomenal job. So going back to our couple here, we're talking to proactive planners. These people have seen what having to answer in an emergency did for their family. So they want to preserve their autonomy, protect the assets that they've built, and reduce future chaos for their children. So that's going to change your sales conversation. They're not looking for special treatment. They're asking for the full context of their lives to be understood. And here's another one that has a very full context. So Marcus disrupts our assumptions about what retirement means in terms of withdrawing from civic life. Marcus is an activist, educator, mentor, informed urbanite, and someone really skeptical of top-down institutions. He doesn't automatically grant you trust to an organization just because you provide housing and care. For him, trust has to be earned through transparency, participation, and observed dignity. Marcus is looking for resident governance, civic engagement within the community, mentorship opportunities for the youth, and a meaningful influence in the next chapter of his life. He's not impressed by luxury. He's watching whether or not your leadership listens and whether your residents are being treated as intellectually capable adults. He doesn't want to be socially occupied. He wants to be socially relevant. Elena brings us back to our family values. So we're looking at a widowed Latina matriarch, retired educator, but she is first and foremost an abuela. She is a grandmother and a mentor and a woman who is deeply, deeply rooted in her faith and her family, not just her immediate family, her extended family. She doesn't see herself stepping away from family life if she has to come to your community. Her identity is based on being relational. So for her, Elena reveals an important distinction. Many residents are not seeking independence from their families. I think a lot of times there's that disconnect that we don't recognize that it creates. They're looking for sustainable interdependence with their family. So this addresses things like guest policies, gathering spaces, language access, transportation, and faith integration as emotional trust signals, not just side amenities. Elena shows us the difference between hospitality and real warmth. Hospitality is operational, and like Elena, warmth is relational. So Carl reminds us that future facing does not always mean urban, digital, trend driven at all. Carl's a retired postal worker, part-time pastor, and someone who's deeply rooted in faith in his local community. He is not looking for reinvention. He is looking for connection without any loss of his identity. For Carl, well-being comes from familiar routines, trusted people, faith, neighborliness, simplicity, and useful roles. He may prefer paper communication, quiet porches, and gardens, with in-person conversation over apps and highly curated programs. That does not make him resistant to moving forward. It makes him clear about what creates well-being for him. Carl reminds me so much of my grandfather, who spent his entire life in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, the little town where I live. And if you don't know where that is, it's the home of Little League Baseball. And if you don't know what that is, then we're somewhere between Scranton State College, Philadelphia, and Pittsburgh, right? And when I travel, I have to explain, where that is in relation to everything else because we're not a major metro market. But I don't believe that living in a smaller community makes people any less discerning, any less complex, or less aware of how they want to live. Someone may prefer a porch to a rooftop lounge, a printed newsletter instead of your app, a conversation with a trusted neighbor for a referral, rather than a highly curated social calendar delivered to their email. That doesn't mean that the person is behind the times. It just means that their definition of well-being is grounded in familiarity, human connection, simplicity, and place. Innovation is not always about adding more. Sometimes it's about recognizing what shouldn't be taken away. But if I could have a polar opposite to that, it would be this. Micah and Devin bring together a whole different set of expectations. So Micah is non-binary and living with early cognitive decline. Devin is their spouse, care partner, advocate, and emotional anchor. This profile asks a difficult question. Can senior living preserve personhood while delivering care? Micah is not just evaluating your clinical competence, they are trying to decide whether identity, autonomy, creativity, language, and dignity remain visible as someone's cognitive needs change. And Devin matters equally. Future residents often, but will not always, arrive as relational units, not necessarily just isolated individuals. Micah's needs do not erase the person. So if we design around only care, we start to miss identity. And if we miss the person, we miss the market. So now that we've met the residents individually, you can see some larger patterns becoming clear. Culture, income, geography, family structure, lifestyle, very different. But some of their core expectations are remarkably consistent. Dignity, agency, emotional safety, the ability to contribute and maintain identity, and trust. They want to have community without erasure, care without infantilization, and technology without surveillance. And they don't want to trade belonging for conformity, which is why we can't continue to treat the market as, a universal image. These are a collection of individual stories that are layered. And while age and geography and care levels still matter, they're not going to matter enough. We have to have conversations about more useful questions, like what makes people feel safe? What makes them feel respected? What makes them feel useful? And what creates emotional fit for the end user, not for us as operators? So this is where the market's moving. And it's one of the reasons that I built our approach at Adage a little bit differently. Years ago, early in my career, I was advocating for more psychographic research. I needed the behavioral insight. I wanted to curate the persona development. And the response from leadership at the time was essentially, we already knew what we needed to know: age, income, geography, and whether someone could afford the product. But those facts only tell us if someone qualifies for the community. They don't tell us anything about whether or not the community is going to fit the life that they're trying to preserve. They don't tell us whether or not someone wants a highly social environment, or they don't tell us what family might mean to them. And they certainly don't indicate anything about faith or ethnicity, or whether or not continued working is a big essential thing for them. So that was a disconnect for me. So I saw that we had become really sophisticated at identifying who could buy senior living, but that we needed to spend more time to understand who would feel at home there. So yes, demographics still matter. I want to make sure I say that. I'm a big fan. Make sure you're clear. Who is your ideal, customer profiles? But behavioral intelligence takes it to the next level. It's essential beyond understanding age, income, acuity, household count, geography. That just tells us where people are consistently. Behavioral intelligence helps us understand more about how they want to live. When we use psychographic tools, primarily Mosaic, in our client work, the purpose isn't to create an interesting persona and put it in a presentation. The insight has to change decisions. So it may change which household receives a particular message. It may change whether or not the message leads with security or intellectual engagement or family connection or financial clarity or social contribution. It may change where we invest our media dollars, which partnerships we develop within the community outside of our walls, what kind of events we offer, and what proof our potential prospects might need from us to feel comfortable enough to take the next step. Behavioral intelligence is only valuable if it changes how we behave as organizations. Knowing more facts about people is not the goal. Making more accurate decisions because we understand them better, that's the goal. So if we have two 74-year-olds with really similar financial profiles, but completely different expectations around technology or spirituality or family involvement, if we only studied age and income, we would miss the emotional reality that's driving their decisions. So behavioral intelligence is not about manipulating people. Or, as I have been accused, reducing them to stereotypes. I'm not doing that. It's about understanding their motivations more accurately. What builds trust? What creates friction? What signals belonging? What preserves dignity for them? What is compatible with the lifestyle they want to lead? And that brings up better strategic questions. We're not looking at a market research report saying, how many older adults live in this market? We're looking at what kind of aging expectations might be present here. What family migration patterns are shaping decisions here? What environments are different groups most likely to trust? That's why behavioral intelligence, it's not about making marketing models. It becomes an operating lens for us to define strategy, improve design, help you curate more authentic and resonant programming, and just ultimately enhance the resident experience because it's more representative of who your residents are and what they need from you. So this is where we transition. Once we understand that the future resident behaves differently, we have to design differently. These personas are not necessarily instructions on how to build 10 separate communities. What we did was take a look at them to say, if we wanted to give each one of these personas a few options of communities, what would they need to include? And what we found reveals a lot about what we need to take seriously when it comes to identity, family, contribution, belonging. So these 6 concepts are designed to be illustrative. They're not necessarily predictions, although I do have a crystal ball. They're just there to be modular so that you can pick the pieces that work for you. They show you what becomes possible when we take our strategy and begin to align it with lived experiences rather than broad averages, which again shifts our leadership discussions from what amenities should we add to what kind of social ecosystem are we here to intentionally build. So we'll start with the intersection. This is the model that asks, what if aging were organized around continued participation in culture rather than a retreat from it? It's built for residents who are very identity aware, socially engaged, digitally connected, and still actively contributing outside of their retirement. It feels like a lot less like a traditional campus and more like a vertical social ecosystem. Housing connected to co-working, maker spaces, rooftop gardens, cultural programming, telehealth, and community partnerships. The resident influence is central to this community. It's not symbolic participation. They have a real voice in programming, priorities, and the community's culture. And the staff there need more than operational competence. They also need cultural and emotional intelligence too. So with the intersection, the defining idea is simple. It's a community not organized around age, but rather behavioral and cultural compatibility. Its core offering is the continued social identity of its residents. So then with Sage Commons, we ask a different question. What if family, culture, and belonging were built into the operating model from the beginning? This community is designed for residents whose aging experiences are deeply relational, where family proximity matters, faith matters, language, food, and tradition with trusted networks all matter. So this isn't a community with a few family-friendly features. It's built with casitas, family gathering spaces, teaching kitchens, gardens, cultural programming, flexible visitation designed around intergenerational lifestyles. It changes how we approach dining and staffing and programming and unit design, but ultimately it changes also how we treat families every day. So the real test when it comes to Sage Commons is whether or not residents can live there with their cultural and family rhythms in place without constantly feeling like an exception. It turns belonging into part of the infrastructure. So the Grove represents an entirely different future because, as we learned with Carl, not every resident wants acceleration. Some want restoration. So this model is built around faith and nature, routine, service to neighbors, simplicity, and contemplative living. Think like cottage clusters, private gardens, walking paths, faith spaces, restorative wellness, and a lot of neighbor to neighbor support. The important distinction here is don't treat simplicity as limitation. Treat it as intentionality. As life becomes more noisy and digitally saturated, calm and human scale environments are going to become increasingly valuable. I'm not sure if you all have seen, but Gen Alpha is turning, not Gen Alpha, the one after that, I believe, is turning back to the flip phones because they want to go low tech, not high tech. So things come in systems. And we need to recognize that some things we want to keep. So containing a space that is calm and human scale, again, becomes increasingly valuable. And also contribution is a huge part here. It might look like gardening or just helping a neighbor or supporting the church or just organizing chapel life. The future isn't always louder. Sometimes it needs to be more grounded. Again, I hope you're getting whiplash. Alta Next is an entirely different challenge to the old retirement narrative. What if older adults weren't retiring from contribution, but simply changing its structure? This model is built for people who still see themselves as creators, consultants, educators, entrepreneurs, and mentors. So instead of an activity room, imagine co-working lounges, media studios, live workspaces, digital support, and flexible routines that make continued contribution easier. Technology matters in this context a lot, but not as novelty. The residents are asking, does this empower me or monitor me? They're asking, does this simplify my life or complicate it? AltaNext uses technology to reduce friction, protect individual autonomy, and ultimately continue to support work, creativity, and learning. So it's able to reframe aging from maintenance to continued evolution. Residents don't just preserve their life, they continue to design it at AltaNext. But Kin Circle Villas takes the next step in terms of asking how we could design a community around how families are actually built now. We said residents don't always arrive as isolated individuals. We're seeing blended families, multi-generational families, chosen families, adult children who live at a far distance, friends who function as siblings. So they arrive with these networks that shape trust and timing and satisfaction and referrals. Even my own family doesn't fit neatly into the traditional household. My children came into our family through adoption at different ages and stages. One of my older children is grown and has a grandbaby of her own. So when I'm thinking about how we design communities for the future, I'm designing for myself. My family relationships extend across generations and households and different histories and responsibilities. So it changes the way I hear phrases like immediate family or primary contact or even adult child. Those labels may be administratively convenient for us, but they're not always going to explain who is emotionally central, who provides support, who's making decisions, and who the resident believes to be their family. So, as we see future residents arrive with these adoptive, blended, chosen families, former spouses who still function as close friends, neighbors that function as siblings, adult children managing the relationship from an entire world away, they are not peripheral to that resident's experience. They're the architecture that's currently holding their life together. So when we look at someplace like Ken Circles, it's again designed around family presence with guest accommodations, gathering spaces, shared dining, intergenerational programming, legacy planning, and communication systems that are designed to keep people anywhere connected. I would also share that I love the idea of the communal kitchens for intergenerational programming, specifically because my grandfather was exceptional at gardening and canning his own gardened vegetables. And he taught my mother, who did not teach me, and therefore I cannot teach my children. Right. So those shared kitchen spaces are a great example of how can we make this designed for families. Our future residents don't want to disappear from their family's life. They want a sustainable way to remain meaningfully inside it through grandparenting or mentoring or fostering on those traditions and participation in the cultural things that matter to them. So treating network as central to the experience is Kin Circle Villas. And our last model is the Bridge and Beacon, which represents intentional longevity culture rather than retirement culture. I'm going to say that one more time. The Bridge and Beacon represents intentional longevity culture rather than retirement culture. So this is designed for residents who are highly educated, personal and mission oriented, civically engaged, and deeply intentional about how they spend their time and their attention. This is not a model that is built to scale. It is built around curation. Residents want intellectual compatibility, the access to med spa or meaningful wellness opportunities, and the chance to contribute in whatever way makes sense for them. So, this is the type of model that would include think tanks or social innovation projects or curated travel, think rooftop gardens and med spa wellness. Like I said, for this resident, luxury is increasingly defined again by intentionality rather than excess. They want influence, They don't just want to occupy a space. So again, Bridge and Beacon treats aging as a redefined continuation of identity, curiosity, and purpose. What's important is that these are just six possible futures. It's not six templates, it's not six predictions, it's six examples of what becomes possible when we stop designing around broad averages and begin designing around evolving expectation and lived experience. So no single model can ever win because in the future, the residents are going to define what family means, what wellness means, what belonging means. But these concepts are modular, as I said at the beginning. A community can borrow governance from the intersection or the intergenerational kitchen design from Sage Commons or the restorative wellness from the Grove and digital infrastructure from Alta Next. The goal is not replication. It's about alignment. Who are we? Who do we serve best? And what emotional experience are we prepared to consistently deliver? Which behavioral expectations are we genuinely equipped to support? The future isn't one models, it's a variety of possible models, and alignment is the thing that makes everything work. So as we move into leaders, once we understand that our future resident is behaviorally different, we have to recognize that our responsibility is now clear. Today's theme is foundations. And again, thank you to Katie for putting together this incredible opportunity. I want to state this for the record, just so we're all on the same page. Residents do not experience your organization in departments. They experience one ecosystem, whether it's marketing, sales, dining, programming, wellness, technology, your operational policies, your staff's tone, your leadership's behavior. It's all one experience to them. And it has to communicate the same thing consistently and clearly. So a new program isn't going to repair a culture that does not understand the complexity of gender. And a new platform is not going to solve a trust problem based on lack of dignity and care delivery in your Google reviews. A renovation is not going to overcome the policies that feel rigid or impersonal for people with chosen families. Going back to those, if we had two competitors with similar pricing, similar amenities, and similar care, they can perform really differently when one of them feels emotionally coherent and the other one feels generic. So as leaders, we have to understand where our organizational promise is and where the lived experience is not. And so a few places to look for that is, where do prospects start to hesitate? Where do families lose confidence? Which policies communicate trust or distrust? Is there a technology in place that creates friction? Are staff in need of more support and training? Hospitality has always said, we serve you well. But tomorrow's resident increasingly wants someone to say, you understand me well. That's the leadership challenge. So where do we begin? Relax. I need everyone to just relax. Okay. I know it's been a lot, but you don't have to reinvent your organization overnight. But you do need to begin auditing your alignment intentionally. So there's four places that I would start. First, listen for recurring signals. Again, what are prospects and families repeatedly asking? What is causing them to hesitate? These are not isolated comments. They're strategic intelligence. So start to look for where the hesitation is. Then get really clear about fit. Which future resident would align naturally with your mission, your culture, your geography, your strengths? Again, the goal is not universal appeal. It's finding those that are an intentional fit. I have one client that I am so grateful for, that when it comes to lived values and a mission-oriented life plan community, they walk the talk. I've never seen residents more engaged, more committed to the health and safety of their neighbors, and the curation and cultivation and safety of their actual physical community, the gardens, the watersheds, being, a naturally occurring national park, essentially. So when we look at what do we already do well, know that it's not about universal fit. It's about a universal appeal. It's about intentional fit. So then look at your emotional experience. Does your move-in process preserve dignity around chosen family or anyone else? Does your technology create friction points and frustration? Are there sensory, cultural, or social needs that are not currently being supported in your community? Ultimately, is your intended experience visible in your daily operations? So look at your core values, look at your mission statement, and then look at your daily operations from an emotional lens. And then fourth, give your residents and your families real voice and influence. Katie, in your first session today, you talked about the post-tour surveys. They are such an incredible place to mine some of this feedback and behavioral insights. But what we can do with that in the future is take it beyond the surveys to a space of co-creation. Family councils that have meaningful input, or visible feedback loops, or programming and policy that's shaped collaboratively and communicated back to the family so that they feel like they're a part of something, or the residents themselves if it's an independent living community. So again, the future readiness is not about becoming trendy. It's about becoming behaviorally accurate, and the goal is alignment. So I did want to leave some room for questions today. I just want to leave you with one final thought. The future of senior living, it's not a housing conversation. It's a human behavior conversation. Your future residents are not just asking, can you care for me? They're asking, will I still feel like myself here? Will I be understood? Will my family and my identity and my routines and my values and my contribution still matter? So the organizations that are going to lead us in the next decade are going to be the ones who understand their future residents with the greatest clarity and then align their systems accordingly. Today's full report, or the full report that today's presentation was built on, as well as the deck itself, should be available in the webinar resources. And if you want to scan the QR code, you can connect with us at ADage for a future ready evaluation session. It'll just be me and you translating these ideas into how it affects your community strategy. We'll take a look at where your community is already aligned and set up for success, where expectations might be outpacing your current experience, and which strategic questions deserve your attention first. So remember, the goal is not to reinvent everything overnight. It's just to start with greater clarity. And better questions are what create that better strategy. And better strategy creates communities where people are not just housed, served, and cared for, but where they are known. That's what I hope for the future. Thank you all so much.
Adrienne, that was fantastic, Adrienne. I love listening to you talk about the research you based this on, because the reason this session made sense for being a digital foundation is that if we don't know who our audience is today, let alone who they're evolving into being, we're going to have a misalignment in our messaging to help them understand the incredible value and work that's being done at the community level. And I love how you bring marketing and sales and operations all into this larger conversation. We did have one audience question. Do you have any good tools to use for the behavioral analysis that you did?
Yes. So typically, when we work with our clients, we take a look at their last 18 months of resident data, as well as their adult child influencer data. So however we have that information. And then we do a data-driven append of about 160 data points, one of them being the Experian Mosaic, which is trusted by brands all over the world. If you're familiar with the Experian credit reporting system, all of you on the call today have an Experian Mosaic. So we're all assigned one based on our age, our zip code, where we live, how much education we have, everything that the worldwide credit system can confirm about us. And that we put together for our clients to look at, okay, how can we segment each of these audiences and connect with them in a resonant way?
Okay, great. Answer the question. Yes, this session will be recorded and available in the event lobby, along with the full report that Adrienne mentioned, as well as any additional resources. So fantastic presentation. I could talk about audience personas and like all the dynamics. You bring so many layers into this discussion. Adrienne, I appreciate you being willing to join with us and share your insights. Thank you. And thank you to everybody who has showed up today for any or all of our sessions. This is just day one of the Clicks Community Summit. After this session, please remember to fill out your survey for an extra entry in our event giveaway. And tomorrow we are setting up for automation and sales alignment. We have 4 great sessions talking about the sales process through mistakes learned in mystery shopping. We've got a great discussion on the speed to lead how do we handle speed to lead. We are going to be talking a little bit about that move-in process and the promise gap between that beautiful tour experience and making that seamless all the way through the move-in process. And then we have a great case study around automation and the impact automation can have across your sales and marketing journey. So that is our agenda for tomorrow. I hope everyone will plan on coming back and joining us for those sessions. Fill out the surveys. It was great diving into this with you, Adrienne, and hang out in the lobby chat if you have other questions or connect with Adrienne directly to pick her brain about all the fascinating data that goes into audience alignment. Thank you.